I tried really hard to not only actually do a video recapping the 2019 BQBL season, since I dropped the ball last year, but also get it finished before the 2020 BQBL season. There might be some mistakes here and there, but they're nothing compared to who won.
He's made a mess of it.
I could really dig a knife into Jay Cutler, but he probably feels bad enough after thinking he was 100% safe going into Week 17, then having to watch Miami have a game-winning drive on the road against the top defense in the league. As usual, Week 17 saw some wild scores, and Mr. Cutler was on the wrong end of it. He's not the only one who assumed he was safe going into the final week, though. He joins Ryan Leaf from 2018, who was 50 points up in Week 16. He also joins TSSS Win in 2016, who was up 73 points. And he joins Johnny Football, who in 2015 had a ridiculous 117-point lead before being relegated on the final week. Time for Hot Top Picks, where most of you did a good job picking the top teams and avoiding negative teams, except for Miami's surprise negative 16 against New England. However, Wade Wilson neglected to start Tampa Bay, or anyone for that matter, which means, yes folks, after being down 5-1 earlier in the season, the Turbush League has picked their way back from embarrassment and has won Hot Top Picks for 2019. Quite the show. Good job, Turbs. Over in Moneyballing It, we find one of those Turbs who started two of the top three teams in Week 17, Johnny Football. He not only won Hot Top Picks for his league, he also stole the Turbush Championship from Chad Hutchinson in glorious fashion. And now to Relegation Watch 2019. Hey, where's all the red text? Where did the geese go? What happened here? Don't tell me he didn't get relegated after spending 10 straight weeks in 8th place? Relegation Watch gets busted again for the second straight year. Foiled! I won't forget this, McNown.
I will have my revenge.
Alright dudes, here's the Week 17 standings, which you've probably already seen in the Commissioner's email. I'm going to go over each one of you and your season, your draft, and your picking percentage separately, so I won't dwell too long on this slide. But it's crazy how much the standings have changed from Week 16 to Week 17. Okay, have we let these numbers sink in long enough? Let's get into some deeper Kirsch League analysis. First, I want to see if what order everyone drafted their teams in really had any effect on the final standings. As we can see here, the first overall pick wasn't a great help for Jay Cutler, as he used it on the 6th best team of 2019, Miami. Don't get me wrong, they got him 142 points earlier in the season, and it looked like a hot dumpster fire the first half of the year, but they also arguably cost Cutler a spot in the Kirsch League next year. Wade Wilson drafted second, but as we all know, didn't actually make his first round pick into the second round, but he made the most of it by picking San Francisco really well throughout the year. Wilson's steal of Tampa in round 2 kept him out of relegation. McNown drafted in the 3rd spot and wasted his pick on Buffalo, but as we'll get to later, we'll find out McNown had one of the worst overall drafts in history. The middle 2 spots belonged to Pauco and Wynn, and they finished in the top 3, with Pauco finding the top team of 2019 with the 4th overall pick and TSSS Win using his 2nd and 3rd round picks, stealing the 4th and 5th best teams. Drafting in the 6th spot, we have the first mention of our 2019 champion, Johnny F.E. Moxon, who found the 2nd best team of 2019 and also had the best overall draft in the Kirsch League. Tony Banks intentionally chose to draft 7th because the 7th draft spot has never been relegated before, and it still hasn't. Finally, we get to Chris Winke, who drafted in the 8th spot and finished there too. Alright guys, it's time to talk about our 2019 Bad Quarterback League champion, Johnny F.E. Moxon. How did he do it?
Dominance.
Not since 2015, when Cleo Lemon owned first place for the final 10 weeks of the season, have we seen someone occupy first place for this long to finish the year. There was no rise to the top. Moxon was already at the top by week 4, and he only got off his throne one time in week 7 to use the bathroom. But legend has it, he called seat check. Like Tony Banks in 2018, Moxon spent a humble week in 8th place before crushing everyone. We all got the first glimpse of something special in the first round of the draft when he took the Redskins, the sole team that took Moxon from 8th place after week 2 to first place 2 weeks later. He chose the Cardinals in the 2nd round, a solid pick at that point. Some criticized him for selecting another team with a young quarterback with a huge upside like he did with Kansas City and Mahomes in the prior year, but Johnny wasn't afraid. In round 3, with the 22nd pick in the draft, he selected that purple team, mainly because Moxon liked their colors, and he found early success with them until his other teams heated up. Finally, he found the steal of the 4th round, the Rams, by far the best pick available at that point, and Jared Goff, like a jester in King Moxon's court, delighted him with his terrible mid-season QB performances. As everyone will find out as I go through everyone else's 2019 season, the draft is only one half of your BQBL success. Picking is a huge part of winning a championship, and as we'll find out later, avoiding relegation. As well as Moxon drafted, he picked just as well, cutting at a stellar 77% clip that was only bested by one other person in either league. Moxon may not have even needed the best draft with his picking prowess, but at this point it's just icing on his massive championship cake. Congratulations. If I had to define TSSS Wynn's 2019 campaign with a few words, I would say
Slow start.
Wynn drafted very well, but I don't think he quite knew what kind of squad he would have until they all played a few weeks. Once Wynn figured them all out, it was all systems go. Wynn was no stranger to the Kirsch League, having won it all in 2014, but in 2019 he was one of the two new kids on the block, having to reboot his franchise. He started his draft with, let's call it the Eli Manning gamble, which actually worked when Eli was swapped, unfortunately for a surprisingly good replacement in Daniel Jones. In the end, the Giants probably didn't quite turn out to be what Wynn was hoping for, especially in Week 16 when they stole 39 points from him. But the 12th best team wasn't so bad when you include his second and third round picks, the Bengals and the Panthers. I think everyone was surprised the Bengals lasted so long in the draft, the 12th overall pick, and the Panthers have traditionally been one of those high-risk, high-reward teams that is perfect in round 3. Wynn was heavy on the Bengals early, but they just weren't producing any BQBL points despite losing games left and right. As frustrating as they were, Wynn stuck with them, and eventually around midseason they started to pay off. Meanwhile, Cam Newton became injured, and all of a sudden, TSSS Wynn had options everywhere. By Week 7, he was done fighting the relegation zone, but he had one problem. He had only started Seattle twice by this point, and as he plotted out the rest of his Seattle starts, Week 10 at the 49ers looked juicy. Unfortunately for Wynn, Week 10 both sucked and blowed, as Seattle put up a -5, and because of that Seattle start, he missed out on Cincinnati's 76-point week against Baltimore. Wynn got his picking back on track after that, but those 3 remaining Seattle starts still cost him some big points by his other teams. But a 720-point finish is nothing to be ashamed of. TSSS Wynn ended up picking at 71%, good enough for 4th in the Kirsch League. If you ignore 2016, which was an insane year for the bad quarterback league, with everyone finishing like 100 points from the championship or relegation, TSSS Wynn has finished in the top 3 of whatever league he's been in the past 5 seasons. And I expect to see him in the top 3 next year too. Oh, Tyler, why are you in 3rd? You know you don't belong there. You've never finished in 3rd before. Palco's season can be summed up as fear of last year. Palco had a well-diagnosed impediment when it came to the 4 teams that burned him last year when he picked really bad. He decided no Detroit, no Chicago, no Cincy, and no Minnesota. The Jets in round 1 was a no-brainer. Helped by Wade Wilson's absence, it was really like the 3rd overall pick instead of the 4th, but Palco snatched them up nonetheless. TSSS Wynn helped him out by taking Cincy off the board in round 2, even though that might have been the reason Palco didn't contend for the title this year, and instead gambled on Mariota and the Titans. A familiar scene played out in Tennessee where the starter gets replaced by someone much more competent, and the Titans pick ended up sucking big time. Again, blinded by his 4-team blackballed list, in round 3 he was helped out when the 2 picks before his grabbed up Chicago and the Lions. Palco was relieved, and then just like before, made a huge error in judgment picking the Cowboys. I don't need to tell you all that this was the worst pick of round 3. Finally, in round 4, with all of his blackballed teams had been taken off the board earlier, his conscience was cleared, and he picked Atlanta, which was the best team remaining at that point. So then, what was Palco's strategy for the season? JETS, 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 Jets. He started them every week from week 2 through week 8, and after week 8, he was 19 points out of first place. However, after week 8 is exactly when the well ran dry. Palco needed to figure out the required starts for the rest of his teams, so he benched the Jets in week 9, missing out on their 35 points. Then the Jets started playing a cupcake schedule at the Dolphins, Giants, at the Redskins, Raiders, at the Bengals, at Miami. These teams don't play defense. Palco had to figure out how to get points from his other 3 teams, and it just didn't work out. He missed out on 51 points from Atlanta in Week 12, and neither the Titans or Cowboys ever produced big points. Palco averaged almost 61 points a week through Week 8, and then only produced 99 total points the final 9 weeks, most of that coming in the final 2. If there's anything to come away from this season, it's definitely that you picked much better than last season, good enough for 3rd best in the Kirsch League, and history is on your side that you'll finish in the top 6 yet again next year. Oh man, how the hell did I end up in 4th after this tumultuous season? To put Tony Banks' season into a few words, lucky. Well, lucky the final few weeks, unlucky for the first 14. As the 2019 draft order came around, I deliberately chose 7th after doing research that said the 7th spot's never been relegated, and I was sincerely trying to not have a championship hangover year. That backfired when Moxon took the Redskins, a team I was hoping would get overlooked. At that point, I wanted to throw this season in the garbage. The Broncos ended up being the 11th best team, but looking at all the round 1 Kirsch picks, they were the 5th best choice amongst the 8 teams drafted. Next, I wanted Oakland, but Winky snatched them up.
Fuck this draft.
I muttered to myself. Jacksonville ended up being another poor selection, but not amongst the worst choices the Kershers made in round 2. Definitely a C- draft at this point. In round 3, I really wanted Detroit, but McNown decided otherwise. Can anything go my way? At this point, I made the conscious decision to just draft old quarterbacks and hope for injuries. It worked for Wade Wilson in 2018. I lucked out big time when Roethlisberger went down for the season in week 2, and the Steelers were the main reason I'm not going to the Turbush League in 2020. The Patriots pick in round 4 ended up being the second best decision that round behind the Rams, and in week 1, all the Kershers were naming me Mr. Relegation Watch, but I was going to show them that I wasn't wrong and I could pick my way out of this mess. Well, I learned something in 2019. I can't pick for shit. The Jags were a total enigma all year. I leaned on the Broncos way too much and got barely anything out of them. The Patriots loved to only play bad when I didn't start them. And like I said, without Delvin Hodges, I probably would have finished 7th or 8th, so lucky is definitely my season in a nutshell. I feel like Wade Wilson always has interesting bad quarterback league seasons. Returning for him from last year is San Fran and New Orleans, as Wade tends to prefer the teams with a burnt orange color or maybe a reddish hue. As you can see, his 4 teams this year, in addition to the other 2 teams he had last year, the Browns and Redskins. And then he also had the Bengals and Steelers in 2017. Blue just isn't his color. Anyway, Wade's draft started out by not starting at all. He missed his picking window, while the rest of us took our sweet time to allow Wade an opportunity to make his pick. He didn't end up making it until the mid-second round, and with it he selected the 49ers, which despite them being the 24th best team, he actually picked them pretty well throughout the year. Next he took Tampa Bay, which if it weren't for the Bengals, would have been the steal of the second round. He followed that up with the 18th best team, Chicago, at the 18th pick, right on cue, and finished with the Saints at pick 31. As you can probably figure out, the Bucs were the key with a draft this bad, and Wade knew how to use them. Through the first 15 weeks, every time the Bucs scored more than 30 points, Wade started them. He didn't miss out on any big weeks until the last 2 of the season when he dropped into 5th place. Mr. Wilson simply didn't need to finish. He was confident that he wouldn't get relegated and more confident that he had no chance at winning anything, so he let his foot off the gas. This probably hurt his picking percentage, as I'm certain he was well above 70% before those final 2 Tampa misses. Nonetheless, we all got exactly what we expected out of Wade Wilson, a quality but not spectacular season.
Cade McFucking-noun.
Mr. Relegation Watch 2019 in 6th place, with the worst draft not only in the Kirsch League, but across both leagues this year. I may have to do some overtime research to see if it was the worst draft of all time. How in the hell are you not going to the Turbush League next season? I'll tell you, it's Cade's one-word motto for the season: picking. Look at that picking percentage, first in the Kirsch and in the Turbush. What we have here is a mix of the worst draft and the best picking. It got him 450 points, which was just enough to earn you another year with the Kershers. McNown did not hesitate to select Buffalo in the first round. Technically the worst pick of round 1 if you don't include Wade Wilson's late 49ers pick, and followed that up with the worst pick of round 2. With the 19th pick, he chose Detroit, which still wasn't a great choice, and with the 30th pick, he picked up Green Bay. Despite this draft, the commissioner had you finishing in 2nd place, while both Cutler and myself had you in dead last. And that's where you were all the way until the last week of the season, when you had to ruin my fun. Kidding aside, you were helped out along the way by Chris Wenke and myself underperforming big time right along with you, giving you hope that even though you spent 10 straight weeks in last place, you were never more than like 72 points away from 6th. Oh, how many points did you score in week 17? 72 points. While Wenke and Banks were fighting over the 6-7 spot, Cade kept creeping up until the perfect time when it's week 17 and he's got Baltimore, the team he's regretted owning all season, playing their backup in a monsoon against a defense that desperately needs to win. We'll call it the perfect storm. Outside of these great late season matchups though, McNown relied on his keen sense of when to start and bench his terrible draft picks. Not once did Cade start his worst team after week 6. In that same time span, Cutler started his worst team 6 times. Wenke started his worst team 8 times. Tony Banks started his worst team 9 times. 9 fucking times in 10 weeks. I'm not even going to include the week where I had a triple bye. Let this season be a lesson to everyone who ever drafts themselves into a terrible spot. You can pick your way out of it, but you probably won't pick as well as Cade McNown did in 2019. Your 6th place finish with the worst draft is well deserved. Oh, I really wanted to root for you. The story of 2017 was Pauco winning the championship, and the other story was Cutler finally making it out of the Turbush League after 6 years. Immediately he proves he belongs here in 2018 with a strong 3rd place finish, after flirting with 1st place most of the year. And in 2019, well, it's fitting that his QB name is Jay Cutler. It's crazy that your drop to the relegation zone in the final week isn't even that notable compared to TSS wins in 2016, or especially Johnny Footballs in 2015. But these final week upsets just just keep happening. If a 117-point league in 2015 isn't safe, well, you should never give yourself a 100% chance of not getting relegated. Jay Cutler's draft wasn't bad. I'm not going to bash Miami as the number 1 overall pick. Houston in round 2 was fine. Cleveland as the number 17th overall was a steal, and you had no control over receiving Kansas City. Everything looked great early on for you too. The Dolphins were the biggest disaster since Chernobyl, but perhaps your week 1 performance was foreshadowing when you picked 2 negative teams and left 123 points on the bench. All was forgotten though after that 152-point week 2, and you might have been the Vegas favorite to win it all. Then I'm not sure what happened. Things were fine through week 5 after netting a 101-point Cleveland start, and you moved into second place. Week 6 you benched Miami's 45 points, but they were hosting the equally terrible Redskins. Understandable. But 2 weeks later, in Week 8, the Dolphins were playing in Pittsburgh, and you didn't start them. Your email says it was a good time to start Kansas City, and Cleveland was playing the Patriots. Another 45 Miami points missed, and Miami would never score more than 21 the rest of the year. Week 11 is really when things started unraveling, as you fell from 4th back to 5th after neglecting to start the Texans playing at Baltimore. What could be better than that? Instead, you started Cleveland, hosting the Steelers, the helmet bash over the head game, and the Dolphins hosting the Bills. 71 points missed. Honestly, you didn't pick that bad, especially compared to me, but after that Week 11 blunder, Winky scored 123 in Week 12, Banks finished the last final weeks scoring 262, and McNown likewise scored 264 over his final 6. It was just too much to keep your head above the relegation line. 9 more points is all you needed to finish in 6th, and we wouldn't even be talking about this. If Miami had lost to New England like they should have, we wouldn't be talking about this. Or at least not having a freaking game-winning drive. Miami takes someone down to relegation the 2nd year in a row, and if there's a teaching moment, don't be the worst picker. Chris Winky is used to extreme finishes. He started his BQBL career with a 7th place Turbush finish, then was one of the first 2 people to ever be promoted. Did well in his first Kirsch season, but finished dead last in 2015. 2 more awful Turbush seasons, and people start thinking the Turbush League should be renamed into the Chris Winky League. Then, in 2018, he shocks the world with a dominating Turbush campaign where he left no prisoners. After a 156-point week 1, he never spent a single week outside of first place. Then, the 2019 Kirsch draft happens, and he, quote-unquote, lucks out. Literally, as during his first-round draft spot, Andrew Luck decides to retire during the preseason, and Winky doesn't hesitate to seize the Colts, and then selects the last season in Oakland Raiders. Winky, like Andrew Luck, is now all set to retire the rest of our chances at winning the Kirsch League. No one has ever won the Turbush League and then the Kirsch League in back-to-back seasons. With his final 2 picks, he collects the Eagles and the Chargers. Oh, the Chargers. Yes, they were the 18th best team to have, and in the 4th round, that's a good thing, right? Here's some league trivia for you. The person who owns the Chargers has been relegated 3 years in a row now. The season starts slow for Winky, and he quickly drops to 8th after week 3. He's not picking poorly, but his teams aren't producing. He especially cannot figure out the Eagles. The Colts are surprisingly competent with Brissett. The Chargers are always difficult to figure out, and despite some early success with them, Winky misses out on 60 points from the Chargers in weeks 15 and 16, as he tries to get his Eagle starts out of the way, while balancing Oakland and Indy. Winky's final downfall was after moving into 5th place in week 12, he finishes the final 5 weeks of the season scoring a grand total of 11 points, while leaving 153 points on the bench. Let me repeat that. He finished the final 5 weeks of the season scoring 11 while leaving 153 on the bench. Forget your draft and forget your 7th place picking. That's why you're going to the Turbush League. I'll see you back in 2021. Alright, Turbs, time to do the same thing for you guys. Yes, each of you is going to get your own slide. It's that time of the year when we can ignore each other's differences and end league segregation and treat everyone equally. Plus, 2 of you guys are honorary Kirschers. I think you know which 2 you are. Let's get things started with Johnny Football. I said you're all equal, but we can't afford team logos like we can in this Kirsch League. Johnny Football is a lot like Chris Winky in that he pretty much either goes all out and wins or flames out big time. This will not only be his 3rd time getting promoted, but the 3rd time winning the Turbush League. He doesn't finish 2nd. I wasn't around for anyone's Turbush draft, but it looks like Johnny Football might have drugged everyone else because his draft picks were ridiculous. In fact, I would go as far to say he had the best draft out of anyone in BQBL history. Arizona wasn't exactly the best choice, but it could have been worse, and Tampa would have been been a steal in round 2 if it weren't for the rest of the Turbushers drafting so bad in round 1, so much that most of round 2's draft picks were really round 1 picks. Except for Tim Tebow time. We're not sure what he was doing. No question about Mr. Football's last 2 picks. What's surprising is that it took so long for Johnny Football to snag first place. Despite having the best draft and the second best picking rate, Chad Hutchinson was no slouch either, as he had the second best draft and the best picking rate. Johnny hung out in 4th place for a while, dropping as far as 5th at the end of week 5 after his only negative week. From there on, though, Johnny would average about 60 points a week, culminating in his impressive 140-point Week 17 performance. His worst week since Week 5 was a 21, easily the highest minimum score over that span. He just couldn't be stopped. Kirsch League officials will be monitoring the 2020 draft to make sure he's not poisoning our emails or tampering with the draft, and unfortunately, history dictates that Johnny Football is going to get relegated next season anyways. However, he does have a shot at that elusive Turbush-Kirsch back-to-back championship. Good luck. Finishing in 10th, but just happy to be a Kirscher again, is Chad Hutchinson. Chad still can't believe he was relegated last season, and he vowed he would be back 1 year later, and here he is, back 1 year later. Like Chris Winkie in 2018, Hutchinson grabbed first place in Week 1, and just like Rose in Titanic, did not let go until she fell asleep and dropped Jack into the bottom of the ocean.
That cold-hearted bitch.
Chad let go of first place too at the last moment, as he fell asleep in Week 17, but there was nothing he could have done to stop Johnny Football, especially considering Chad Hutchinson's best in Turbush 73% picking percentage. Chad had a squad somewhat like Jay Cutler. They both owned Miami and Cleveland, along with an AFC South team and a 4th-round playoff contender, except Hutchinson got 100 points more from Miami than Cutler, 20 points more from Cleveland, 35 points more from the AFC South team, and Green Bay produced 140 points more than the Chiefs team Cutler got stuck with. Welcome back to the Kirsch League. I'm surprised Ryan Leaf finished 3rd. I was expecting Jeff George to pass you, so congratulations on finishing in probably the most frustrating spot. Like Chris Winkie, you drafted the Colts at the same time and position in the draft, and like Winkie, it didn't really work out for you. It's usually not a good thing when I say things like Winkie, because that means like a person who got relegated. You two both picked up the Eagles, and that didn't help either. However, unlike Winkie, you managed to get 60 more points from Indianapolis and 25 more from Philly. Like Tyler Palko, you smartly drafted the Jets, who somehow fell to 9th. Sorry, we're still researching to see if Johnny Football poisoned everybody or something. The Jets just weren't enough to get you over the hump. Tyler Palko drafted worse than you, but managed to squeeze 25 more points out of the Jets. And overall, Palko picked better than you, but you finished 50 points higher. The Jets by themselves just aren't going to carry you to promotion. Better luck next year, pal. Jeff George was the surprise of the Turbush League mid-season. After the Turbush's usual Week 11 promotion push, Jeff George asserted himself as the dark horse favorite, challenging Ryan Leaf for the 2nd spot, which he would then take over in Week 12. Jeff George got to that level by picking well, the 2nd best in the league, but his draft held him back, especially once Johnny Football picked up triple mushrooms from that item box and left you and Leaf in the dust after Week 14. It's sad because your season had all the makings of a Cinderella story like Craig Krenzel's a few years back. If you keep up the picking and just draft better, we will see you in the Kirsch League in 2021. Colt Quinn Whedon finishes in 5th this season after a frustrating start. Seattle did you no favors all year, and Oakland teased you with that 101-point week that came out of nowhere when they played Tampa Bay. Cincinnati soon became your cash cow after realizing they could go winless, but you never had another team to score consistent points. A pretty average draft and a pretty average picking percentage leads to a pretty average season. I am honestly shocked you've been in the Turbush League this long after the last 4 seasons you've put together. It is only a matter of time until we see Whedon back in the Kirsch League. On paper, it looks like Jamarcus Russell could have had a pretty good season. Buffalo probably wasn't a first-round pick, and you really spent too much time plugging Detroit earlier in the year, and not enough time starting to Carolina. Kansas City would be a tough team to own. It's basically adding 6 bye weeks to your schedule because you're lucky to get 0 points from their starts. But you actually did a good job at starting them. I'm not sure if you could have done enough to pass Hutchinson, but overall it seemed like a promising season considering the teams you selected for yourself. Oh man, Tim Tebow time. We only share Denver, but I feel like I share your frustrations. Definitely unlucky with Baltimore, but the rest of the draft was a little below decent. Nice redemption in Week 17, although that's like one of those weeks where you say to yourself, how come that couldn't happen a few more times during the year? With Drew Lock commanding the Broncos next year, I think it might be time for you to part with your Tim Tebow spirit team. It seems like just yesterday you and I were battling in the Kirsch League, but I guess that was 2015 when we finished 9 points away from each other. I know you have it in you. Another deep sigh and we finally get to the legend himself, Steve Grogan. What legend am I referring to? Well, Grogan is now the only person in Bad Quarterback League history to win the Curse Championship and finish dead last in the Turbush League. His story is truly a fall from grace. After riding high and demolishing everyone in 2015 with a 297-point margin of victory, he then spends 2016 flirting with the relegation line until blasting out with a 98-point final week, riding the Browns and Bills as much as he possibly can throughout the year. In 2016, he nabs the Jets. He should be safe, right? Well, no. The Jets ditched Fitzpatrick and started Josh McCown, who goes on to have a very unmemorable BQBL year. Unmemorable to everyone except Cleo Lemon, who almost stages a late season comeback again, but falls just short and is relegated. Distraught and not wanting to tarnish the Cleo Lemon brand, he benches his namesake and becomes Steve Grogan. In 2018, he drafts Cleveland and Jacksonville, and makes a late season push for promotion, along with Colt Quinn Wheaton, but again falls just short. Grogan missing out on rejoining the Curse League by 4 points. Finally, in 2019, Grogan has a pretty terrible draft and even more terrible luck in picking teams and has hit rock bottom. Perhaps this will be just part 1 to a story that will involve a quick rise back to the top. With Moxon and McNown holding 2 titles and both remaining in the Curse League, Grogan needs to set his sights at returning to the promised land in 2021 to hopefully become the first person to hold 3 Curse championships. Alright guys, the offseason starts now.